Hey, Matthew Ventures here with my buddy Scott Mulligan, two halves of the whole, creating Black Vein Productions. You know us from hits such as Tony Hawk's Existential Nightmare and No Stranger, and of course, NSA Intern. So today we teamed up again for the first time in 3 years to make a game in 3 days. We participated in Ludum Dare 55, which is an international game jam where people try to make games, mostly from scratch, in a very short amount of time, either 2 or 3 days. So we went with the 3 day version of this, which is called the Jam, where you're allowed to use existing assets from other sources, and that's kind of we downloaded music and stuff. We weren't making that from scratch, but we basically coded and designed our game from scratch in a game engine that was new to both of us. We had pretty much not used it before, and we made something out of it. So today we're gonna just chat with you about what that process was like, show you the game, and then show you where you can check out other people's games for the other folks who participated in this jam, of which I understand there were thousands. This is probably like one of the most popular game jams, so it's always fun to kind of see everybody who's coming out, and then later tonight, Scott and I are going to meet to kind of play through other people's games, because something this game jam does really well actually is it requires you to play other people's games for them to play your game. So that's the intro. Scott, what was this? Well, oh, sorry. We were supposed to say our history. So, Scott, what was it like seeing jumping into the saddle with Mr. V after 3 years vacation?
It was cool. I mean, I think both of us have come to the game after 3 years with new experiences, and this was my first time coding really on a project. I guess in the past I helped script certain elements of the story, but this was the first time I was really like in the engine, feeling like I was meaningfully adding, to it, especially with like the combat system and some other elements of it. So it was definitely a different experience from past game jams. It was really nice at the end to just like do some writing. I felt like, I'm back in the, trying to put some soul and heart into the game, pun intended, because skeletons don't, I don't believe they have any hearts anyway. So that's my thought.
Nice. Yeah, yeah, it's been a while. I mean, I make games for a living, so I'm kind of always making games, but it's a very different thing, game jams, you know? Like the work I do in my free time versus the work I do on the job versus whatever this was. They're all very different ways of making games. And just like you can make music a lot of different ways, it's like I don't know, it's just interesting. The different processes through which we make art. But
What would
before
you want to go into? Like, what do you think of as differences?
Well, yes, I do want to go into that, but I'm gonna write that down on the agenda to talk on later. Different processes. Let's just keep this video rolling and just talk about kind of what we did Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Show them the game, and then we'll go into the deep, heady discussion. Because I imagine a lot of folks will get bored by that point, so I don't want to bore too many people too quickly. So, what did we do Friday? How did we even
Okay,
start this thing? I think you were the first one to hear about the topic, which was summoning. So we had to make a game that was
yeah.
somewhat about summoning.
So we make a Google Doc. We throw in all our ideas in there. So I had a bunch of ideas, and then I bring in Matthew, and then Matthew goes, "No, no, no." So he says, "How about this?" And then I go, "You know what? That sounds pretty good." and, um,
It didn't
uh,
quite go like that, but I think at least it was important for me to try and subvert the theme a little bit, just because a lot of these themes, I mean, it's kind of like a running joke that like the themes for Ludum Dare suck, and so the premise is you got to kind of, if you get a game idea, probably like 1 or 2 degrees separation from that game idea, I think is when you get to something that's going to feel fresh within the jam, because obviously with a theme like summoning, most people are going to do like, or the immediate thought I should say is like, okay, you just summon something. But instead, we try to invert that a little bit by saying, okay, what if you are summoned? And then from the beginning, I love this idea of getting summoned to court, like a court summons. We didn't wind up going with that, but I saw somebody else did that as well. So I love those play on word stuff. But we eventually went with getting summoned to work. And I don't know where we came up with the skeleton concept. Did you create that?
Yeah, like a lot of ideas, I feel like, I was kind of joking in the beginning. A lot of this is just like an amalgamation of like, oh, I'll have some ideas about, something, and Matthew will have some ideas about something. And then just out of nowhere, it's kind of hard to like pinpoint, oh, what was yours and what was mine in the idea. You know what I mean? Especially once you start fleshing it out. One of the coolest parts of this game, I think, is we wanted it to be like thematic as well. We have the theme of uh, work-life balance, which I think is fun. But we don't need to get into the heady elements yet. We don't want anybody falling asleep on
No,
us.
no, no one's sleeping. No one's
Um,
sleeping in this
no, don't
chat.
fall asleep, anybody. So we made a skeleton dad simulator. Long story short, yeah. And so Friday night was the amalgamation of ideas, kind of having a little game plan. We started development that night, and then in the morning we continued on. Pretty much all of Saturday was coding the game and getting the combat system. Matthew, I worked on the kind of the work life. Matthew worked on the home life section of the game, and then towards the end of that day was combining the two elements together.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
then that was Saturday, and then I go to bed. Matthew woke up this morning, got some stuff done. Then I woke up, and then we polished it up. We got the sound working. We got the art. We fixed up, I think, some elements of that. We added a lot of charm, I think, to the game,
So
and we fixed a bunch of bugs. And
so
that
kind
was
of
kind of the whole development. It took about 40 hours in total.
yeah. So at the end of Friday, what did we have working, if anything? Like, what did we leave the project in a state at the end of
It's
Friday?
funny. I don't even really remember that's the thing with these game jams is it's kind of
It
like
goes so
a li-
fast.
it's a little bit of a blur, and then you wake up 2 days later with 4 energy drink cans, food around you, clothes everywhere, and you're like, what just happened? It feels like yeah, a
Yeah, it's
whirlwind.
a weird marathon kind of thing where it blends together. But yeah, I mean, last night I was supposed to like kind of combine the stuff. I didn't realize it, but you're totally right. Like one of us did the life thing and one of us did the work thing. Kind of that was a nice way to split up our work, and then we just tried to reconcile it. So, and I mostly did that, and it kind of went along. And we used GitHub, or we used Git through Source Tree in order to try and kind of keep us up to date, but that was very frustrating. I do not like Git. I'm a Perforce stan, but we somehow made it through. And so then we had Sunday come along. We did some updates. Scott started adding in some weird sound effects, which were hilarious. I think he recorded most of them himself. And no. And then we played the game. And there's some bugs in it still, but we've decided to give up and move on with our lives. So, so why don't we show them the demo, and then we'll go from there.
I would love if you just say, "Oh, and let's show them the demo." You click play, and then your computer explodes. It's like, oh, gee.
So
Nice.
this is the Ludum Dare page, Graveyard Shift Skeleton Dad Simulator. There's three controls. You can dodge, which is kind of like you don't get
Get dodge,
damaged.
duck, dive.
The dodge, duck and weave, duck and cover, duck and cover. So anyway, this one's spacebar to attack, and F is to clean up after the dog. Originally, we were gonna have a lot of different house chores for you to do, so that was kind of the biggest change. Is that when you were at home, you were supposed to do a lot of stuff, but now we just have cleaning up after the dog, who kind of makes a little mess.
Awooga.
All right, so you push play, and then this is a chat with your wife.
I can't hear you. Oh, you just okay. Now I can hear you.
Okay, so this is a chat with Patella, your wife. So she's like, "Hey, how you doing?" You have a little conversation with her. I won't spoil it for you. And then we hear "Daddy's home," because that is you on the right-hand side, that yellow guy walking around. And the dog is pooping, so you got to go up there, and you got to clean that up. So you managed to clean that up. Oh, I didn't clean it up in time, so it said failed. And now I'm gonna get summoned to work. So I just got summoned to the left-hand side over here, and this adventurer is now trying to kill me. You can see my health on the bottom. It says total health, 55%. I can dodge, and it kind of looks like I'm doing a little dance move. And if I'm dodging, then he can't do damage to me. But in order to get back to work and back to my family, I need to finish the job. So I need to start attacking this space. Okay? If I get 100% progress on him, a portal comes up, which I can go through. And we hear that wonderful Daddy's Home chime. And now I can go back to cleaning up after the dog who was scooting along. So let me go try to clean this up. Alright. And that is the game, basically. So I'm going to get spawned into work again, but I've only got 25% health. So it's going to be a little bit hard to defeat this guy. So let's do a good job. The combat... Of course, I effortlessly defeat the boss. And, oh, and then here we go. So the timer ended, so I was able to successfully complete the day. You have a final conversation with the wifey, which I won't spoil. And then this gives you a quest results. So in this case, it shows you the quests I completed, the quests I failed. I completed 3 out of 9, and my rating was Bag of Bones, which is not very good, frankly. And then I returned to the main menu. So that is the game. All right, back to Scott. Oh, I'm sorry, I was not sharing my screen.
Oh, that's all right.
You
I
should have
played
told
the
me.
game. I played the. I thought you couldn't share when you
Oh,
were
okay. I
recording.
wanted you to be able to see it, but yes. So now
Yes.
they've seen the game, and now people are petering off. They're falling asleep, and we can go into the heady, deep decision making that went into this game.
I think one of the cool, maybe you could talk about one of the coolest elements is the 2 platforms moving up and down that you were thinking about. What made you think of that idea? How did you even come to it?
Yeah. So basically, kind of if you're at life, that section of the scale comes up, and if you're at the other section, the other one goes up. How there's 2 big scales. I mean, I guess I was just interested in this idea of work-life balance, and then I thought it should be a scale. I'm not sure what my influence was. I can't think of another game that really does that. So I don't know what I was thinking of there. I guess I just thought it would be cool. And I also kind of like the idea of like a game within a game. Like the house, if you just zoomed in, that could be the whole game. But I like the idea of zooming out. And ideally, to make that idea work, you would have asynchronous elements in both. Oh, I guess it came from the timing puzzle, because I knew like I wanted you to have. When I said, yeah, I actually remember my train of thought now, because I thought, okay, what is summoning? Summoning is just changing positions. So mechanically, what I could do interesting with that is you need to be in a position to do something, and then if you're out of position, you can't do the thing. So I thought, okay, graphically on the screen, I want to represent whether I'm in the position or out of the position. So I kind of already had an idea of like, okay, 2 worlds. And then I thought 2 sides of a scale, that would be a good way to visually portray that. Because if I'm on one side of the scale, I can't deal with whatever's happening on the right hand side. And so if I had more time, like I've loved for us to create more quests that you need to do in the house. Like, originally we had this idea of getting the kids prevent the kids from getting into the cookie jar, or making breakfast for them. And if you fail the omelet, then a different quest comes up as a result of that. And we had these ideas for these kids. You would have this son named Mandabilly, and he needed his calcium medicine, but if you didn't get the calcium medicine, his bones would get brittle. So then when he asked you to play catch with him, he would catch the ball and his bone would break, and then for the rest of the game he'd be walking around with a broken bone. But unfortunately, we didn't get to any of that, because that's how game jams go. You just try to hack it together. So that's a long answer, but that's kind of what I thought.
Yes, yeah, that's how these things start too. Is you have a lot of ideas, and you're probably not going to be able to do it all, but it's always good to have all those ideas, because then you're able to have a wide assortment of things to pick from when you're like scoping it down. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then also if you're just really good, you could get to the other things as well, if you just work super fast. So Matthew, what was this experience like for you? This was your first time in Godot. What did you think of it as an engine? Maybe that would be a whole separate video. Honestly, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah,
But
I mean, we could go into the specifics at some point. I mean, I'll just say here, I'm going to show my screen just so they can see really quick. This is our code. The number one frustration I have with Godot is if I'm looking at a file right here, you might think it's the game scene file, because it seems like this is like a tab system. But you'll notice that And even yeah, if I switch tabs, sometimes the code changes, but other times it doesn't. And it's like I'm on a different tab now. Why am I seeing the same code? And the answer is because this thing at the top kind of is not what you're looking at. Instead, it's this thing on the left hand side. Those are the different tabs you're switching between. So that was really frustrating. Like, that was the only thing that was kind of frustrating about Godot, honestly. And then there was some bugs at the end that we just couldn't figure out. So I tried to like hack a solution, and I did the best I could. So the
And what did
debugging
you?
support isn't great.
And before the Godot community comes and slaughters you, because it has a lot of ardent supporters, in
Yes.
part because it's an awesome engine, and in part because it's open source, which I think just attracts a lot of, support. What did you like about the engine,
Yeah, that is very cool. I mean,
if anything?
I definitely did like the engine. I did not detest the engine. I think that it was very fast. This is the fastest, maybe not the fastest engine I've worked in, but definitely faster than like Unity or Unreal. Just because I think you could just like add a script so quickly. Like I feel like even adding a script in Unity is like a big process. You've got to like add it to the project and then open it up in a whole separate program. The idea that like everything's embedded in this engine, like the code editor, the that's really cool. Just kind of having everything in one place. I like that aspect. I think Game Maker might be like that too. So we have to try Game Maker at some point.
Was it frustrating for you when you think to yourself, you're like, oh, I know exactly how to do this in Unity? And you kind of are, for reference for people that don't know, Matthew has a lot of experience in Unity, and you're trying out, like, in Godot now, you have to relearn. How was that?
I would not say it was frustrating for me. It's just kind of like part of the process. Like, and I guess I kind of knew that going into it. So tell me, like, what made you want to go with Godot? Because we've made so many games in Unity, and I know you say like, oh, I've just done the script, but Scott's done a lot of work in the engine. It's not like he's just writing in a Word doc. Kind of what made you want to use Godot? And I know you've been learning it a bit. I'd love to hear. Sorry, two questions in one, but you've been doing some self-studying and you've said that you've gotten a lot more out of actually just doing this project. So I'd love to hear kind of how those compare and if maybe you have any feedback for somebody who's trying to learn Godot for the first time.
Well, everybody's different, so what works for you may not work for me. Necessary caveat there, but I think it's really cool to set like a project or an aim when you want to learn something, because a lot of times learning can feel like it is pointless. Like you're just going down all these hallways to nowhere. Whereas if you have a very specific project, it's like, oh, I need to learn about adding music or adding a sound because I need to add a sound in my game. It's very actionable. You get to see the result of whatever you were learning, and at the end of it, you have a product as well. You have something that you could show people, and that's really cool. And it's also unique as well, like as opposed to a class where you're maybe just following a script, and what you create a lot of the time, everybody else in the class made as well. So, you know, it doesn't have that um, uniqueness if you as if you had made your own project. But overall, I would say like coding is cool. It's a lot of fun. It's definitely your day just kind of flies by, or at least for me, it does. Like yesterday, I can't believe it was like 14 hours. It's just like, and you just feel like there's never enough time. Well, maybe that's in particular with the jam as well. Um, but what you were asking, like, what made me want to do Godot is that I think it's a very beginner friendly game engine for people interested in making games, or at least that's what I've heard. And it felt like, oh, if we're in Unity, I almost feel bad coding because I'm just like, Matthew is such an expert in this. It's not efficient for me to try to do coding. Whereas with Godot, I felt more like, oh, I can actually be meaningfully helpful in this domain, if that makes sense. Because it's like, oh, it's a new engine. I could probably actually contribute. So that's how I felt.
Yeah. Yeah, it was fun to kind of be at the same level, like trying to learn the thing together. Um, yeah, and I agree. I think Godot's definitely more beginner friendly than Unity. So if like somebody didn't know how to program in either, I would be like, "Oh yeah, start with Godot. That's a good place for you to learn." That's like a good like it's a good playground and it's faster, I think, to learn. So that's probably a better place for you to start learning like game design fundamentals and stuff like that.
And also, if you're just doing 2D, like I'm sure Unity can be used for so many things. It could be used for apps, it could be used for software, it could be used for a million different things. Godot is really for games. Like it is specifically tailored to make games. I don't know many people making like websites with Godot. I'm sure I don't even know if it's possible. Probably people will figure out how to make anything. So I think if you want to make 2D games, I've heard Godot is one of the best engines to get started.
Yeah, and I actually think that was a really good decision for us, was just to make a 2D game, because 3D games are so much more complicated. So learning a new engine, it was good to try and make something small. I think our idea was a little ambitious, but we were able to figure it out. Um, but the fact that it was 2D, I think helped us a lot, because I mean 3D just adds so much more complexity. So that was good for us.
And anybody looking to do it, my biggest piece of advice is try to finish what you start. Like try to start a project and keep the scope small. Like this project is not a great example of that because we had a bigger scope, but that's also because Matthew is a AAA, game developer. So it's like I wasn't too worried about this. And Matthew and I have worked together on multiple projects at this point, so I know we're going to be able to figure it out. But if you're making your own thing, especially solo, I would recommend keeping it really tiny, even smaller than you think. Like if you're like, trust me, any idea that you have, cut it maybe into 1/10 and or even 1/20th, and try to make that. So that's what I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. Um, because you don't want to be working on making it work like Sunday. Ideally, you have a shitty version on Friday. Saturday, you get to polish it. Like, and if it's not, because ideally you do like 30% of your time making the game, 70% polishing, or something like that, right? And it never works out that way, unfortunately. It's like 80% of your time maybe is making it, and then 180% of your time, like, did you go overtime? But more than you expected. But yeah.
This one, I think we actually did a very good job to pat ourselves on the back in terms of creep. Like we oftentimes have projects that run over development times, but this one, I think we were very clear, like, and we were very clear about, okay, it's done. Even if there are bugs, it is what it is. And I think that development is so freeing, and is so nice because you're just like, we're not selling this, at least at the moment, and I don't think we ever will. Like, it's a free game. It's supposed to be fun, So I don't feel any sort of obligation. Like, if it breaks, I feel bad, but like, if we know it works pretty much, so.
Yeah. What were kind of the biggest things you learned coding, so that somebody, if they're starting out, they don't have to like go through a 2-day headache to realize something that you wish you had just been told in the beginning?
Oh, they're like specific. It would not. It's hard to think off the top of my head, but with Godot in particular, I had a really hard time with global elements. So, like, let's say I wanted to have a sound happen in the global, and I put it in the global scene. This sounds odd if you haven't programmed in Godot, but it didn't work, and I'd be like, where do I? I didn't even know where to attach it. You know what I mean? So, what I had to do was attach a sound to a player, and then I would reference that sound, and that worked. I don't know if that's the most efficient way of doing it. I don't know if that's even the best way or the best way, beyond efficiency. But it ended up working, So,
Yeah.
and I think that's the other thing with game jams, though. And maybe you could speak to this. A lot of times, you're just like hacking it. You're not doing the prettiest code. You're not trying to be the most economical. You're like, okay, how do I get this done in fast amount of time? It really prioritizes that, and I think that's a skill, that you should develop as well. Personally, I'm sure. I don't know. I've never had a job where I was coding, but I imagine there are times where you only have a week or a couple days, and your boss needs it, so you need to learn how to work quickly as well.
Yeah. No, for sure. And I'm particularly bad at that. I'm a slow coder. But I think it's good to be fast. So I think I should
Did,
probably get faster. This is a good way to train.
did you have fun with, because for reference, Matthew's working on like a more longer term project right now, that he's been working on for a little while, a couple years now. How was it? Was it very odd to just make a game in like 2 days and you're like, whoa, what the heck? Or was it like, frustrating? How'd you feel?
I think it was nice to work on something new. I think like the only part where it kind of became frustrating was like once like once we kind of had to implement it, like I remember we wrote the cool design and we're like, this is awesome, done, hand it in. Like that would have been nice to just plug that into Chat GPT and get a game out of it. But the fact that you got to like implement it and like chase down all these bugs, it's like whether you're making a game in 2 days or 2 years, it's like it just takes a lot of time to kind of cover all the edge cases. So
Would you
that's
prefer that? I'm just curious. Like, do you enjoy though the process of coding? Like, do you know what I'm saying in terms of figuring it out and that kind of thing, or what? How do you
um
feel about that? Or would you
yeah,
prefer to just put in like the English, like natural language, and then it just produces game?
I enjoy building long term scalable solutions, and I just don't get to do that on a game jam. Like everything's got to be crappy, like make it just work quick. Um, and like a lot of time, and that's the only thing that's could be kind of scary is like if you only do game jams, you'll learn how to code in like a shitty way, like it because there's it's kind of different. It's a different kind of way to do it. So yeah. Well, I mean, I had a good time, but I kind of wish it was even shorter. I wish I did an even shorter idea. I guess people always say that, but it was good. It was good. It's just I kind of wish it was shorter, and I also would be interested in trying out even more accessible game engines. So Godot, at the end of the day, it goes down into like a scripting thing, but I really want to try out like the Unreal Engine for Fortnite and maybe Game Maker. I don't know what that one's about, but I've heard good things about it. So I think that would be cool. Check those out.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think game jams are maybe a great way to explore an engine, a crash course in it, and then if you like it, you could take a deeper dive.
Yeah. Yeah, and I wish like it would be awesome if like Unreal was like sponsoring it or like associated with the game jam. Like that would be so cool. I know my former employer, Core Games, did a lot of sponsorships for like a previous game jam. So we were like looking up like, oh, what's Ludum Dare about? And like Core Games kept coming up, so that was cool. All right, so talked about that. Do you have any? Where did the art and the music come from? Where did we source all that stuff from? And was there any? I guess I'm just interested in what we sourced. Was there any design ideas that came from somewhere else? Or I know you watched a tutorial on how to do combat. Did you wind up changing it much, or was it kind of just directly from that? Kind of what?
No, a lot of it is just tutorials. Like it's just like it's funny. You could probably see from the code like this part is from this tutorial, this part is from this tutorial, and then when you need to make a new element, it's kind of just reworking whatever you learned in a tutorial, and trying to jam it in. So I would say definitely tutorials were super super helpful. The annoying thing with an engine, maybe with Godot, is that it's changing so rapidly, or at least it feels like it. So if I would watch a tutorial from like 5 years ago, it was not very applicable. Like it was, and then you watch a new tutorial and it's like actually Godot fixed all of that from 5 years ago. And that's the cool thing with Godot is that it's a dynamic engine that people are always adding to it and changing things. But it's also like, the knowledge that people learned is probably no longer applicable from 5, 8 years ago.
Yeah, I actually remember seeing that a lot too. I've been using ChatGPT a lot in my workflow where I'll like say, do this thing, and then it will give me code, and then I'll copy it, paste it. And like a lot of times it wouldn't work. And then I would learn that, like, oh, that's how to do it in Godot 3.5, apparently. And what was so annoying was like, it would be like, I forget what it's called, but like in 3.5, the function was like called spawn, but in Godot 4, it was called instantiate. So it was just kind of like why did they need to change the name for the function that does the same thing? That was just kind of confusing. But yeah, I can appreciate why that was difficult. I had the same issue basically. And then for the art, I did most of my art from like online. I just googled like 3D or art generator. And then other things I just googled like image searched some art, and then I downloaded it, and then I edited it. And then I just tried to credit the original creator with like a link here and there. Sadly, can't do that with the AI generated stuff, but for the most part, it was just kind of like temp, and then I was like, all right, well, actually, maybe this is just what we're working with.
And the funny part too was the tutorial I was following. You're obviously a human adventurer, so I utilized the enemy in their game as our hero and the hero as our enemy, which was kind of a funny thing to do.
That is interesting. Yeah, you kind of learned a tutorial as the, and then you had to invert it. Yeah,
Exactly.
that is interesting.
I will say though, for anybody who is like a writer or like a art person, artist, I guess is the better term for that, and you've been thinking about coding, it's not as scary as like I think a lot of people make it out to be. I think a lot of people think of coding as like such a hard skill, and they think of everything else as very soft. Or at least that's how I've sometimes heard it presented by like, especially like art people who are like very afraid, and they're like, "Oh, I don't want to touch." I really think you shouldn't have that bias. I think you should just try it out, and I think you'll find that there is a certain artistry in the programming elements. And even if you don't become a programmer, I think it's really useful to understand this. Like whenever I program, it gives me a new appreciation of like what Matthew does on one of our projects, or what if I'm working with other programmers, what they're doing on the project, and I have a better understanding of like, oh, if we create an element, it's probably a good idea to just reuse that element again and again, rather than creating these like bespoke systems that all have separate things. So you begin to think more from their perspective and what would be optimal for them, which I think is a useful skill as an artist. So I would encourage people to try to at least try programming for a minute.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, the role reversal is it's
And,
kind of a
and
good empathy machine.
Same thing for programmers. If you're a programmer and you're like, "Ah, art's scary," I would encourage you to throw that bias out. I think I would encourage you to try to draw or try to paint or try to write something. You're going to learn a lot, and you're going to see things from their perspective. You're like, "Wow, that system I made does really suck." Like, and like, sure, I think it's a small thing that you have to do this, but now that I'm the artist, I have to do this every single time. And like, I think that's a big issue with programming in general, like even just beyond video games with software, where you have programmers who do not do the thing or utilize the software. And there's big battles about that. People are like, I think the DoorDash guys, like, all the programmers need to use DoorDash, like they need to
Yeah, I
become in the
remember that.
and the programmers are like, I get paid lots and lots of money and I do not wish to go outside. And that's a caricature. It's not true. A lot of programmers go outside. But I think that the sentiment behind what that CEO was doing, I understand. And I don't necessarily think it's a worse idea. I think you could just listen to the people as well, the dashers. And one of the coolest things that Matthew and I have done is we'll record with consent somebody playing our game, and we'll just watch where their cursor moves or what they do in the game, and that's very useful.
Yeah, definitely important step. Um, yeah. So yeah, maybe next time we could try, if we do this again, we could do a full inversion where you do all the coding. So did you actually have a lot of coding experience beforehand? Like,
Not really.
so
This
you
was
felt like
one.
it was for starting from scratch, basically.
This felt pretty much. I mean, I've used Godot before for like making like a menu screen and like having a background and making a button, and I've taken like CS50, and I went through that whole class. So I wasn't unfamiliar. Like I wasn't like, what is a var and what is a string, and and it made me appreciate in Godot you don't need semicolons, which is quite nice. So
I miss my semicolons. I
you
think you can
know,
add them, right? You can add them and it doesn't matter.
I think you could program in because typically you program in C sharp, right?
That
So I
is
think
true.
you could just program in C sharp in Godot if you wanted to. You don't have to utilize their native, GD script.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so excited that Slay the Spire 2 is going to be in Godot, and hopefully more studios do Godot stuff so that Godot can grow as an engine, because we need more viable third-party engines in this industry. It's very important for the health of this industry. Is a diversified environment.
And also shout out to the Godot people. Like it's open source, so they're not. It seems
Yeah.
like it is a very cool project. Like they're not
Open
trying
source
to.
is so awesome.
Yeah, and they're not trying to like milk developers for all their money or anything like that. It's definitely seems like a labor of love, actually, in a lot of ways. I think they should get paid, whoever is the developers of Godot, um, but I think
Well,
it's really cool that it's like open and everything.
they don't get they don't take a revenue cut if you make money. I think they may.
Oh, they do? I'm not
I
sure.
don't know if they do. Um, yeah. All right. Well, was there anything else you wanted to talk about? I think we'll probably end the video here, and then me and Scott are gonna just play some games later, so that we can see what everybody else made. Um, any final
Well,
notes?
shout out to any BVP fans who are still
The
here
real
after
ones.
the real ones. We know it has been years, and but here you go. Here's your you wanted content. Here's your content. It's a minute long or a minute and 30 seconds. It's funny because it's still. If somebody didn't tell me this does feel like a BVP game, like
Oh yeah, it's got a lot of the BVP charm.
yeah, which is funny to me.
Well,
It's cool that we've been able to retain that.
it's just a product of our our mix. I'm sure if you made a game, it's gonna have half. It's gonna feel half BVP regardless of if I'm there.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
All right. Well, hey everybody, thanks for checking it out. In the description will be the link to go and play the game, and you can also check out other games at that link if you're interested in seeing
Pokemon,
else.
go to our itch page
See you there.
and
Bye.
vote.